So it's just a little short break there. But yeah, I'm gonna just carry on as I am, so you guys can keep working as well. But yeah, just to reiterate what I said just before I left off, we're just focused in on these sort of the relationship between the leaves. So not necessarily lots of detail within each individual leaf itself, but what's really important is that they all interact in the right way. And the same goes for any of the other references. So when the flowers are overlapping, or I was just speaking with my tutored student about the skull painting. Each flower kind of captures light in a slightly different way. So I'll just drop down. So this flower feels the darkest. This one feels just ever so slightly lightest. There are these sort of little bits of the flower catching a bit more light than the one on the right. And it's only very subtle, but it's something I would choose to play up. So if I make this flower a little bit darker than this one, a bit lighter than this one, the darkest, it creates a slight variation between each flower, and it starts to sort of enhance a sense that this flower is sort of receding and moving behind the skull a bit. This one's sitting on top and catching lots of light. So it's a way of managing your tones and starting to put a bit of your own artistic input into the piece. Because like my painting, if I go back to my painting, is not by any means, it's not got all the leaves. The leaves aren't necessarily exactly the same shape. What I'm starting to do is construct something that sort of captures the feel of the leaves as far as I'm concerned, like an impression of them, basically. And it's not as detailed as if I made it photographic, but I enjoy looking at these sorts of paintings because when you get really close to them, you can sort of see how simply a leaf might be painted. But from a distance, if you kind of step back, it feels like everything merges together. So that's what, for this sort of painting, is what we're after. So I'll carry on now. Yeah, as far as the ridges of paint go, that's probably if you're using, are you using a lot of medium and getting those ridges, Anne? Do you find, or is it more when you're using thicker paint? Yeah, so if you're using thicker paint, it's just can be difficult to necessarily totally get rid of ridging. You can sort of, if you take a clean brush, so something that you've either wiped clean or ideally is probably dry and clean, and use that. You might find that's a way, if you kind of like softly sort of sweep that over the ridges, that will get rid of the ridges. They'll probably also smudge the paint slightly. But if the ridges are causing a problem, it's better to sort of smudge the paint and then sort of make adjustments that way. Your other option, if it's like really ridged and you want to get rid of it, you can take a palette knife and just kind of scrape the paint back up. It's a slightly more drastic solution, but it can work. Or you can, if you need to, because we're sort of working over sort of dry paint, you can wipe it back. So there, for instance, I was able to just go back to what I originally had just by wiping. So that's one option for sort of neatening up anything like ridging that you're struggling with a bit. If it was based on medium, so if it's because your paint with medium is ridging, you might find that goes away as the medium dries slightly naturally. But if it's not based around the medium, then it would probably need to be altered in some way if it's quite thick paint that's doing that. Hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. But yeah, partly it just sort of takes a bit of time to develop a knack for the amount of medium that you're using. So don't worry if you're struggling a little bit with that. That's always tricky. And it's sort of to do with brushwork, brush control, which I always consider to be a slightly sort of high level skill that you naturally start to develop the more that you oil paint. The most important sort of fundamental stuff to focus on is to do with values and sort of relationships between shapes. So don't worry too much if you're getting a bit of ridging or those sorts of things. So you can see again here I've just got this sort of lighter portion of a leaf. Then I just mix up gradually darker halftones and I'll blend it back down towards the shadowier region. And then that makes it feel like part of it is catching light and then part of it is emerging. Also, part of it is then curving back down into the shadow. But I'm just working leaf by leaf. Which is how we approach these sorts of final stages. So just working with smaller and smaller sections of the painting. So if you ever get lost at any point as well when you're working in more complex, detailed areas, I recommend just taking a bit of a short break and sort of catching up with your thoughts, because when you're sort of working, you can start to get a bit mechanical and maybe sort of not quite pay quite as much attention. Can also start to get a bit too repetitive what you're doing, so things will start to look too regular. And when you're working with things like leaves or flowers, or even the skull forms, nothing is quite as regular as how we will tend to sort of make it. So humans always sort of start to make everything more systematic and regular than it actually is. There's always more irregularity than you expect when you're working from nature. So it's always can be really useful just to kind of take the odd break and step back from the piece. Especially once you get to this sort of stage, because you're working on much smaller areas, you're probably not loading as much paint. You tend to be able to kind of work for much longer periods. But then that can also lead to sort of slight complacency or sort of your attention drifting off a bit. So it's good to sort of force yourself back into observing a bit more critically what you're doing. So as I get around to this side of the leaves, things start to go really dark in certain places, particularly dark. As I say, we are going to go back and sort of do our final really dark accents and notes right at the end. So things do tend to sort of muddy a bit as we're working. But I'm missing quite a lot of really dark sections, so I can sort of go in and plonk them now. So I'm just about nearing the end of these leaf forms. You should be hopefully see a little bit of a shift in terms of not necessarily detail, as I say, but more sort of organization, that they start to make a bit more sense. To a reasonable degree, so they're going to be more similar in value to the shadows. So they're not going to be like a really bright color like the brightest portions of the leaves. So bear that in mind as you're adding those sorts of little elements of detail. So I'm pretty much there with these top leaf forms. As I say, there are some little notes still to go through the central section of the painting. Through the darker portions of the leaves, which could do with some really dark accents. But that's something that we'll add in the sort of final pass over, because things do tend to muddy a bit, as I say. Hopefully you can see that sort of, it's neatened out the leaves a bit and given them a bit more structure. So how they're responding to light, how they're overlapping and sort of casting light onto one another. If I zoom in, you should be able to see there's not a ton of detail necessarily. So they're sort of more just big generalized brushstrokes, wherever I can use a reasonably large, simple brushstroke to give the right impression or to make the right effect in terms of one leaf overlapping another or variation within the leaves because they're variegated. I've just sort of done what's necessary, basically, which is a good level of detail for something that's sort of like a secondary element. As I say, the finest details we're going to be putting through more into the skull forms, and not into the leaves. So that's what you're going for. I'm going to just give you guys a little bit of time to catch up before moving into the lower leaves, which won't take too long. They'll just be a few minutes. And then we'll start working on the skull form, which, as I say, will be our kind of our focus for most of the piece, apart from the final sort of section where we'll be working on those accents and highlights. And if you have any questions at this stage, it's a good time to ask. Otherwise, I'll carry on in a few minutes, just give you a little bit of time to catch up, because I've been working quite quickly today. So I'll carry on now. As I say, just doing the same thing, the last few leaves down this bottom left-hand section. I'm going to leave this little portion of leaves till very near the end. Partly there's not too much I need to do to them. They're kind of low down, not super prominent. But also I'm not using a mile stick just because it means your view isn't as badly blocked. So I'm trying to just generally work in a way that means if I do rest my hand, I'm not smudging paint at all. But otherwise, I mean, with yours, if you're using a mile stick and you're okay to kind of work all around the piece, then I would recommend mostly trying to get your foliage and your leaves done. As I say, most of mine will be done. Just that one will remain. That little branch will remain till the very end, and then we'll work on it.